in the Hollywood Foreign Press Association. It's people with different tastes, you know.
But yeah, you know, it is what it is, and I think we shouldn't take the award shows too seriously. It's fun to see it happen, and hopefully see some movies you like be talked about. But it's
fun to kind of watch the shows to see, you know, what's going to happen. What are people going? Is someone going to say something, you know, that's going to be controversial? It's almost like more entertainment in that respect than it is anything else. But I'll say this though: some people take it very seriously.
They do.
And it's a passion for them. It's like their fantasy football, their fantasy baseball, or whatever. Yeah. And I mean, I know we're going to be talking about the Oscars on an episode.
Yeah, we're
after the noms come out.
Well, I was going to say we're gonna kind of almost do a month of, you know, kind of Oscar talk leading up to the actual Oscars, because you know, we'll talk about the nominees. We'll probably talk about the history of the Oscars in February.
It has a very long history. It goes back all the way to the late 20s.
Yeah.
So it goes way back.
So that's a little bit of a preview of what we got coming up. But tonight's episode, we are going to delve into kind of a little bit of a, you could say we're going to put our professor hats back on, as you'd say, a little bit. You know, we're not experts of any kind, but we do want to talk about something in the history of cinema, and something I personally find to be maybe one of the most influential periods of cinema ever, because it's still something that's evolving and being taken from now, and it's the French New Wave movement of roughly the late 1950s through the 60s, you know, we're going to kind of give you a little bit of an overview of, you know, what filmmakers were involved in it, and how, you know, what are the kind of the components of what makes up that film movement. So where do you want to start?
Yeah, we'll start with a little bit, you know, we'll go getting back in our cinema discovery machine, going back to, you know, the 50s and the 40s and whatnot. The French New Wave, or La Nouvelle Vague, if you're cool and you want to say it in the French.
Yeah, I will not try to say any French today.
I took 5 years of French, combination of high school and college, so I can say stuff like that and sound cool, but I can't converse in French or anything like that. Like, it's limited. But at least I can, like, get the pronunciations close enough to impress people. But with that being said, La Nouvelle Vague was a movement, like Steven said, that started in the late 1950s, went through the 60s. Some say, you know, the mid-60s. I like to extend it a little bit more, give it a little more room to breathe. But it started with a group of film critics, people who were writing for a very prestigious French film cinema magazine called Cahiers du Cinéma, which is probably something many people are familiar with. It's still, I believe, in print today. I think every year they come out with issues and stuff like that, and I don't know if you can get it here in the States or not, and if you can, you have to order it, and it's really expensive, and I think it's only in French. I'm not quite sure on that, so don't quote me. But basically, these are names that you've probably heard of before. This is like film school 101 names. Like, French New Wave is one of the most important periods of film history in the 20th century, not only for the movies and the people that that we discovered through it, but the influence of it throughout the rest of the century, as well as going into today. So it started off with, like I said, writers from the Cahiers du Cinéma, people like Jean-Luc Godard, Francois Truffaut, Claude Chabrol, Jacques Rivette, and also Eric Romer. And these people were known as the Young Turks, and they were basically they were critics, and they were writing in these magazines, doing reviews and all that kind of stuff. And their big thing was they hated the way that French cinema had become too rigid and too traditional. Yeah, I mean, for them it was boring, essentially.
Yeah, basically there was this, basically, which it sounds weird when you say it out loud, but the fact that the cinema had gotten too perfect. Like, it was too streamlined.
It was too structured.
It was too structured. They were pumping out, like, I think it was like a routine of like 120 movies a year. And everything, was very much kind of how Hollywood had kind of built up its stuff, like, where everything was staged on sets and things were perfect all the time, and not a lot of experimentation with filmmaking. It was just very standard.
And the subject matter in the films that were coming out, they felt were not real. They were not subject matters that related to not only them, but to the people of France and the way they lived, the more common man perspective. Yeah. These movies were more like literary adaptations that were very pompous and things like that, classic stuff like that. And they decided they were going to, try their hand at making movies themselves. But their philosophies and their ideas were kind of inspired by writings and people that they read before. Someone named Alexander Ostruk made a manifesto called The Birth of the New Avant-Garde, the Camera Stylo. This was published in 1948, and basically he had this theory or this idea that we now know as the auteur theory, basically.
Yeah, basically there was an American theorist that kind of coined that phrase. I think his name was
Andrew Sarris, who passed away a few years ago. He was a critic. He was a movie critic. He wrote books and stuff like that. You can go and read his stuff now. He kind of coined that phrase, but the idea was, put to paper in 1948. This idea that movies are they're more artistry than they are kind of a product, that they're kind of like a painting or a novel where the person, the literal author, the person making the movie, can and should imprint themselves onto this film. They should put their own style into it, their own feelings, make it kind of cathartic or something like that. And this was something that was definitely picked up by Francois Truffaut. I think he wrote he wrote something similar to that in 1953.
He wrote a manifesto in the magazine that they wrote in, the Cashier du Cinema.
Right.
And it really kind of just started a big controversy, with this, how things were. And when he finally did his film, 400 Blows,
right.
He really kind of, it's really the movie that's kind of known as the beginning of the French New Wave, at least popularizing pushing it forward, getting them money, to do their movies, because at the time,
right,
government would not give money to no names, just like
right.
Hollywood nowadays. Nobody in independent cinema is getting money from the studios.
It works. Movie financing, that's another episode we could do, because it's wide ranging and it's different per country or whatnot. Here in the United States, we have capitalism, so everything's kind of privatized. So you get money from production companies, studios, whatever. But in some countries, the government gives you money to make movies. I know that happens in Australia all the time. I mean, here we get they do have tax breaks or tax things where it makes it more incentivized to shoot in a particular state or particular place or things like that.
Yeah.
But that's a whole different story. But going back to the French New Wave, they also had another philosophy that I want to backtrack. Before we get into the movies, I want to get into iconoclasm. Iconoclasm is this kind of philosophy of the tearing down of certain traditions, the tearing down of icons, or just being kind of anti-establishment, if you will. You know what I mean? Kind of rebelling against the known order of things or the tradition of things. And that's kind of their philosophies going into making their movies, is they wanted to make their movies completely different than what they were seeing on screen. And also, in every way, I would say. And that's when we get into kind of the first films coming out. A lot of people credit Chabrol's Le Beau Serge as the first official French New Wave film from 1958. Most people say The 400 Blows because it was commercially successful.
It's what really, it's, since he was, Francois Truffaut was somebody that people knew. They knew the name through his writings. He's kind of the one that pushed it. That right. got the foot in the door.
Yeah, and the movie that came out in 1960, which is even more associated with the French New Wave is Jean-Luc Godard's Breathless.
Yeah.
That movie, Steven and I have talked about it before very much in depth, and that movie is just completely different than even what Truffaut did with 400 Blows. It's so erratic in its filmmaking and revolutionary.
Yeah, very much with Breathless, especially the pure idea of what they're trying to go for is kind of encapsulated in that movie, because they were all about trying cinema verite, which is like very much going to the bare minimum of film equipment and trying to make a movie very guerrilla, almost guerrilla style, where you're doing a lot of handheld camera, not as much lighting setup, you're using real locations, and that's kind of and especially with Breathless, they shot a lot of the movie was really long originally, and basically to get it down to that hour and a half that it is now, they just cut out what they thought was non-essential, and it happy accident wise created things that are now replicated, specifically jump cuts.
Yes.
Are the big thing that was kind of popularized through this movie.
Yeah, jump cutting is something now that everyone does.
Oh yeah,
I do it
even on YouTube. Yeah, on YouTube, it's a standard almost.
Oh, YouTube is a standard. It's a standard for me because you got to take out things you have to and it's done in various ways. It's done in the French New Wave. It's done to transition from scene to scene. It's also done within scenes to match up dialogue or stuff like that. But when it came to the overall cinematography, it was like nothing you've ever seen before. It was something that was completely different than what was originally done. It was the way they would shoot things traditionally in cinema, in major movie studios and stuff like that, is they would you have a master shot, and then you would edit off of that master shot, whether it would be a 2-shot or a shot reverse shot or something like that. But in Jean-Luc Godard and his movies and the French New Wave, there was no master shots, there was no traditional shot reverse shots, there was just shooting wildly. Sometimes you would just have the camera focus on somebody, and there would just be someone talking to them off screen, and they would just be standing there, and there would be no chemistry or real flow in the scenes. And the jump cutting kind of killed the flow as well, but it made the audiences aware that they were watching a movie. Yeah. Their movies weren't escapism. That was the one thing that's different than traditional movies at the time.
They wanted to bring more sincerity to the movies. They wanted it to feel more relatable and not so much, like you said, an escape. Which there's room for both, of course. But I think at the time they felt like everything that was coming out, or what people were seeing, was all about escapism. And I think that is very much our today's society. Today, it's I think we're due for another movement, in cinema, where we get away from we're a little bit too much into escapism, and we need to get a little bit more reality, I think, again.
Right. Right now, escapism is what makes the big bucks, so that's the way the things are rolling now. Where you get a lot of the more real, tangible stuff is within independent cinema. That's when you get the more real looks at real life and real people going through real emotional, grounded in reality type stuff. And very much so, a lot of that was, the basis was in the French New Wave. And what is interesting is we mentioned, this idea of, bare bones type filmmaking. A lot of it is kind of inspired by another movement, which we'll probably talk about in the future at some time, Italian neorealism. Italian neorealism is as bare bones as you can get. If you've seen Bicycle Thieves or anything like that, it's like, non-professional actors shooting in real locations, just bare bones type stuff. And the French New Wave took a lot of that. Of course, some of these actors are, were professional actors, and they became, much more popular because of the French New Wave. They're at least remembered now. And a lot of these are big names that we all see in these movies. People like Alain Delon and Anna Karina, Brigitte Bardot, Jean-Paul Belmondo. I mean, just, so many names. Jean-Paul Léaud, who was in 400 Blows, and Truffaut did a whole series of the character from 400 Blows, and just did a series of movies with that character following his entire life. Something that is astonishingly current because a few years ago, Richard Linklater did basically the same thing, where he shot a movie over 20 years chronicling the life of this character that he created, very much inspired by that. We also had other people like Catherine Deneuve, Françoise d'Orléac, Jean Moreau was another one. Gene Seberg was another one. Some other filmmakers who are not Francois Truffaut, and
there was a whole
There's a whole bunch of them.
There was what they called left bank.
The left bank directors.
Which were specifically, I would say Agnes Varda was kind of the big.
She's a big one. She's one that a lot of people don't know about, or they don't realize that she's actually still making movies.
Oh yeah,
Godard is still making movies as well. A lot of people are not really seeing him now, but Agnes Varda is still making movies. She's drifted into more her movies were more documentary style based. If you've seen a lot of her movies, they're mostly short films and documentaries and stuff like that, but they're fantastic.
Yeah, a lot of the left bank French New Wave players were. Their movies were a lot more literary, like they came from a literary background, but
they were still more artistic based.
But they were still a connection there with what they were doing on the right side.
They called the left bank or rive gauche for people who aren't aware. I'm assuming that this has to do with the Seine River that goes through Paris.
Well, they were also older filmmakers. They'd already been around for a little bit in the left side.
But I think I think that's what that's in reference to, is the left bank versus the right bank. I could be way wrong on that, but that's just me, prognosticating. Agnes Varda, her husband Jacques Demy, huge influence on musicals and stuff like that.
Oh yeah,
there is a Jacques Demy box set from Criterion. A Blu-ray box set that's just absolutely fantastic. And he dealt with a lot of more romantic and fantasy type elements. This idea of, fairy tale type romances and things like that, which were really good. Umbrellas of Cherbourg was an influence on La La Land. Literally every single line of dialogue in Umbrellas of Cherbourg is sung, which is something you don't ever see. It's just
not
incredible.
As much anymore, yeah.
Right, yeah. Even in traditional musicals, they didn't sing every single line.
No.
You also have Alain Resnais, who's a director that he started off doing documentaries. He did a documentary called Night and Fog, which is a short documentary, came out in 1956, which is kind of the going over the Holocaust and its aftermath and stuff like that. He shows actual footage of just these, concentration camps and stuff.
And that's really the connection between the left and the right bank is the wanting to get into realism, wanting to get into what is real and what's sincere, and not about trying to cover up the problems of the world. Wanting to get into the political and the social stuff instead of...
there was huge political and social stuff.
They were occupied during the war, and kind of the birth of the new wave was when they were finally out of occupation, when the war was over.
All of these people were, post World War II generation. Some of them lived through the occupation and stuff like that. These were people who were, very expressive politically because of it. And there was a lot of political things going on throughout the world in the 1960s, but also in France with the government and, youth movements and stuff like that. It just absolutely influential time when it comes to culture. And by influence, we mean, there were a lot of directors who would watch these movies in film schools, in coffee houses and art theaters and stuff like that in the late 60s, in the 70s. Many people that we know of today, I come back to this all the time, and I feel it sound like a broken record. That whole generation of American filmmakers got their inspiration from foreign filmmakers, specifically from the French New Wave. Martin Scorsese, Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, all of those guys from that American cinema from the late 60s and 70s got all their influence from them. Quentin Tarantino, I believe his production company, I think it's still called A Band Apart,
yeah.
which is a Jean-Luc Godard film. If you look in the credits of, I want to say Pulp Fiction or maybe Reservoir Dogs, he thanks Jean-Luc Godard in it. I think he's like distanced himself now, saying like, "Oh yeah, he's not that influential on me anymore." But I'm like, yeah, he is.
Yeah, well, and if you didn't know this, Francois, if I could speak, Francois Truffaut was in Close Encounters.
Yes.
So there's with Spielberg, he was actually, because he did some acting. He acted in some of his own movies. He was in Night and Day and some other ones, and so yeah, I mean they very much influenced American cinema in the 60s and 70s, and we'll eventually get to the American New Wave in another episode. Yeah,
we'll get to that movement as well. There's a bunch of movements, but this was, I feel, one that we had to get to early because I think it's the first one that I think people need to be made aware of. And a lot of these movements are connected to one another in some form or another. Some of them happen, like, overlap with one another. Yeah. I know in Great Britain during the same time as the French New Wave, Britain was going through a new wave themselves in the 50s and 60s, where they were having their own movement where they were getting down to making movies about the common folk and stuff like that, very similar to what the New Wave was doing. And
what's interesting to me is a lot of, like in today's culture, we look at foreign cinema as maybe being the more artistic, form of cinema. But back then, as this French New Wave was being kind of enveloped, starting to be created, they were inspired by American cinema. They were inspired by Orson Welles. They were inspired by the American films of Alfred Hitchcock and Howard Hawks, and they were watching. These guys were cinephiles. They were watching these movies, all these movies, and that was the other big thing, is that they were people that were. They were able to watch a lot of cinema, and it wasn't just something that they just came up with. They were very inspired by other people.
Yeah, so, and that's something that is very commonplace now.
Oh, it's common now, yeah.
I mean, look at us. We're watching, we're cinephiles. We're watching movies to learn about movies. That's how I learned. I didn't go to film school or anything like that. I always say I took a few film courses here and there, but yeah, I did. But I didn't go to film school traditionally, and the way I've learned is by watching the greats. Well,
back then it was hard.
How they worked.
It was hard because it wasn't as easy. But during that time, and I think it's still around, they had a particular cinema that had like a vast library of American and French films. I think it's cinema. What is it called?
Cinema Politique.
I think something like that. Yeah. And apparently it was always regularly. Packed out with people watching movies.
Right. Yeah, I know a few more filmmakers that they were influenced by. John Ford, who basically invented the traditional American Western. People like Nicholas Ray, who was doing a lot of American social commentary in the 1950s. Just watch Rebel Without a Cause or something like that. And what is interesting is that most famously, one of the most well-known film books that you can buy is the Francois Truffaut and Alfred Hitchcock interview book, where Francois Truffaut sat down with Alfred Hitchcock and they go through his entire filmography going up to, I don't even know when, the 50s or 60s or something like that. And you can listen to the audio tapes of their conversations and whatnot. Yeah, and it's just fascinating how much Truffaut idolized Alfred Hitchcock and his style, because the auteur theory wasn't really a thing, and it was just something that, it's one of those things where we give it a name after the fact, or something like that.
That could be an episode by itself, because there was really a debate between the guy we mentioned earlier,
Andrew Saris,
and another journalist, a female
journalist.
Her name? I think her last name was Keller. Something Keller, I think, was her name.
I'm going to look it up because I know exactly what you're talking about.
And basically, she was on the opposite side, where she didn't believe in this auteur theory, and that a movie should be judged on its own and not by its artist.
Which is a very interesting thing we could get into in the whole episode.
That's what I'm saying. I think we could make that a whole.
I know who it was. It was Pauline Kael.
Yeah,
Pauline Kael and Andrew Sarris had a little like difference of opinion, literally difference of film theory, basically.
Yeah.
Where do you take the film as it is, or do you take the outside aspects in evaluation of the movie, specifically the filmmaker and what they are trying to say, should we have to like have that subtextual thing added to the movie to say it to make it good or better or worse? Like, does that matter? Right. And that's what the auteur theory thinks, that there needs to be more subtextual stuff to make the movie better. And they're me, I'm more a subscriber of the auteur theory.
Me too. Yeah.
Just because I view film as an artistic expression by a specific artist. The artist being the filmmaker making the movie. And if you watch an Alfred Hitchcock film, you're like, that's a Hitchcock film. You watch an Orson Welles film, wow, that's Wellesian. That's Orson Welles. And you start seeing these different aspects.
I don't like to subscribe to the idea that movies are basically like on a conveyor belt, and it doesn't matter who. That's how mainstream movies are a lot of times. When you see something that you've seen 1,000 times get pumped out again, and it just doesn't have anything significantly memorable about it, that's when I think of the other side. I like movies to have a certain flair and look a certain way, and I can identify with the filmmaker. I think slowly but surely we're almost getting back to that time where filmmakers were the stars. Like, actors are becoming less of the reason people go to the movies now, and sometimes now it's the filmmakers again. I think Tarantino, I think Christopher Nolan, and there's others, and I'm hoping
certainly.
I hope we get more and more back to that. Because
every generation seems to pump out a new generation of auteur filmmakers.
In the 90s we had the Kevin Smiths and
that's another movement we have to go into.
Yeah. But hopefully we're getting back to this thing where people care about the people behind the scenes and the people with the vision more than necessarily the people you just see on screen.
Right. And I think that's important, because it's important to, I think, view movies more than just popcorn entertainment, which certainly some of them are. But I think it's important to appreciate them for being more than that.
Yeah.
It elevates movies to a new stratosphere that I think makes it higher than life. You know what I mean? Like, it makes I think maybe it's I want to say that because I want to make sure that watching all of these movies are worthwhile. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You spend hours and hours of your life dedicated to something. You want to make sure it's worth that dedication.
Yeah.
And movies, for some are things they just do, for no particular importance. They just do it to do it. But for me and Steven and other cinephiles out there, this is a big part of our lives. So these movies mean more to us.
Yeah, sometimes I look to movies to help me wrap my head around something. If I can't figure out why maybe some part of my life isn't working out, or I'm mad at somebody and I don't understand their point of view, maybe I'll watch a movie that connects me to that idea, and maybe I can see something in a different way. And
right.
I think there's a lot of ways that film and can make you understand the world better, and not just the world that you live in, but the rest of the world that you don't live in.
Yeah, and movies can connect people. They can disconnect people as well.
Sure.
As the internet will show us.
Oh yeah.
I mean, Steven and I, came together and bonded over movies and stuff like that. But speaking of movies, I want to get into kind of mentioning some of the more prominent films in the French New Wave, for those of you out there who want to get into the French New Wave and don't know where to start, basically. Like we said, like I say when I tell people to get into anything, is start from the beginning. That's the best place to start. If you want to start with 400 Blows, that's where I started, with Francois Truffaut's 400 Blows, and then Breathless, and then kind of... and I kind of go back and forth between Godard and Truffaut. The next one in Godard is Vive sa vie, which is a great film. Truffaut had Jim.
Jules and Jim is one I haven't seen yet, but I hear is just fantastic.
It is fantastic. It has that famous scene where they run from one side of the Louvre Museum to the other side, and they time it to like break the world record or something. It's another great film. It's a film that's about human relationships. It's kind of based around a love triangle. It's fantastic. If you want to step out of Francois Truffaut and Godard, Agnes Varda, Cleo from 5 to 7 is a great film from 1962. She's a great director. If you want to go into something that's more, difficult to watch but more challenging, Night and Fog is a shorter film to watch from Alain Resnais, but he also did Hiroshima, Mon Amour.
I was going to say that
movie is it's sexual, it's dramatic, it started off as actually being a documentary about the aftermath of, the bomb being dropped on Hiroshima, the atomic bomb. And the beginning of that movie, I have to warn people, it's graphic. It is graphic. But once you get past that, it's a beautiful film. You have a film called Alphaville, I think was another Godard film.
Yeah, you have also another one of the Left Bank directors was Chris Marker.
Yes.
He did
La
that. Yeah, he did. It's basically photographs.
The whole film is done in still photographs, and it's literally the same plot as 12 Monkeys, which was done by Terry Gilliam in the 90s. And Terry Gilliam famously has said, like, oh yeah, I never saw the movie or whatever. And I'm like, dude, you made it. It's like the same plot. It's the same plot. It's a little coincidental.
I mean, there's one of my favorite filmmakers that we've kind of brought up. I don't know if I've seen a lot of the movies from this era, but I like Eric Rohmer.
Eric Rohmer's really good.
Yeah, I got his box set from Arrow, and I've seen a good portion of, but I'm not sure that all the movies came from this era. The ones I saw might have come a little bit later, maybe in the 70s.
Yeah, a lot of these directors made films past the French New Wave era. You know what I mean?
Truffaut unfortunately died pretty young.
He passed away in the 80s.
Yeah.
I want to say he passed away in the 80s. Like I said, Godard's still around, but Eric Rohmer is famous for doing his 6 Moral Tales, which is available in a DVD box set from Criterion. Hopefully we'll get that Blu-ray upgrade eventually, because I've seen them, and they are very good. And they're all about, they all center around, like, a male character, and they're all kind of about sex and romance, and the complications that surround those two subjects.
And I would say
they're all about, like, morality and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I would say
they're based on that.
Even if the ones because I know the ones that I've seen, even if they were later on in his career, they are very much the same thing. A lot of the same concepts are in them films too. So yeah, I mean, I really liked the movies I've seen from him. So I can't wait. I haven't seen the 6 Moral Tales, but I definitely want to check them out.
Yeah, they're really good. That was one of the main things I wanted to watch on Filmstruck before it went away.
Night and Day is one I've seen from
Night
Truffaut,
and Day is really good.
Which is one of the best movies about making movies.
Making a movie, it really is. That in like 8.5, but that's Italian cinema.
Yeah.
Who else did I want to mention? I want to mention someone who is not part of the Left Bank or Cahiers du Cinéma, and that is a director I think everybody needs to be aware of. That is Jean-Pierre Melville.
Oh, yeah.
Jean-Pierre Melville he was one of the older filmmakers who was making movies way before the French New Wave started, and he was making movies during and after the French New Wave. He is a fantastic filmmaker. He made a lot of movies in the French neo-noir subgenre, which came out in the 60s as well in France. Le Samurai, Le Cercle Rouge, movies like that, which are just fantastic.
He worked with the actor, what's his name, from Breathless a few times.
Not Jean-Paul Belmondo, Alain Delon.
Yeah. And did, something like... like you said, Cirque de la Rouge and
he was actually in Breathless.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
As an actor.
Yeah.
He did Le Deleuze, Le Deuxième Souffle, Army of Shadows, which is, I believe, about German occupation and the French Resistance. I believe that's what that movie's about. I've had that Blu-ray for years.
The thing is even before the French New Wave, Melville was doing films that were very much
stuff in the 40s.
Yeah, he was doing stuff that was art that was probably something that was, if it wasn't for the war, would have kept going on. But when the war happened, the Nazis were controlling what was coming out.
Oh, of course.
Something like what's the one he did?
He did Le Silence de la Mer.
Yeah, and that was about a German soldier that basically stays with a French family and kind of, keeps them captive, basically. So that's a movie that's very much social and politically has something to say, and that's the kind of what the French New Wave is. A lot of the big deal of that, and he was doing it before that, so it's not like he wasn't, already ahead of his game at the time.
He was. I would say he would be an influence on the Cahiers du Cinema directors as well as the Left Bank directors. Yeah. I mean, they would probably be watching his movies.
That came out in the 30s, didn't it?
Le Silence de la Mer came out 1949.
49, okay.
Yeah, he also did Les Enfants Terribles, which he co-directed with Jean Cocteau, a French surrealist director who did the movie Orpheus, which is a adaptation, I believe, on that play, I believe. Yeah, Orpheus, where the guy has to go down into hell to retrieve the soul of his beloved or whatever, but he can't look back at her while he's retrieving it, or else she'll disappear. So it's like that thing where you have to have faith. But the way Jean Cocteau shoots his movies, they're very surreal. He also did the Beauty and the Beast movie from the 40s as well. Very surreal. That's one of Guillermo del Toro's favorite movies.
I can see that.
Got a lot of influence from that. Melville did Bob Le Flambeur. I mean, some really, really great films. Unfortunately, to see all these movies now that we're talking about, you kind of have to buy them.
Until the Criterion channel gets up and running, right. It's kind of hard to find these. I mean, you can probably look them up on YouTube and rent them, but it's gonna,
Yeah, there are probably some other streaming services that will offer them to you, Fandor or Canopy or someone like that. But
the Criterion Collection's got a good, amount.
Yeah, honestly, the one of the cornerstones or bedrocks of the Criterion Collection is the French New Wave. Yeah. The two first Blu-rays I think I ever bought from them were like 400 Blows and Breathless. Like every single collection I've ever seen on YouTube of Criterion has Breathless in it. Yeah. Like it's like Film School 101. That and Bicycle Thieves I think are Film School 101. Yeah. There are many people to go over when it comes to the French New Wave. There's a lot of other directors that I don't think are as well known. Someone like Louis Malle, who I think is a great director. He did Elevator to the Gallows.
That's one of my favorites. Yeah,
which came out during that time. He also did a bunch of movies. One movie that I always tell people to watch because I don't think a lot of people watch it is Murmur of the Heart. Just watch it. It's available on DVD, but just find it if you can. It's one of those it's like a 400 Blows where it's a young kid growing up and dealing with growing pains and that type of journey. But apparently it's semi-autobiographical or something like that. I don't know. Watch the movie. But also, I think
just watch the movie.
Just watch the movie. Yeah. Georges Franju is another director whose work I'm not too familiar with, but he has done some movies that are on the Criterion Collection. The one film that I know people need to know about is Eyes Without a Face. He did that movie, and that movie's amazing. He also did Judex, which is another film on the Criterion Collection. But Eyes Without a Face, I think, is a staple for everyone to watch, specifically around Halloween. That's a great watch.
Oh, it's a good one, yeah. So, I mean, we've kind of went over a lot of the filmmakers and a lot of some of the history and some of the kind of the filmmaking techniques that make up, whether it's the documentary kind of style, shooting and the jump cuts. And
the camera work is just unlike anything you saw before.
It's about staying in the moment and not jumping and not going by the typical standard. If it's a conversation, they're just panning, they're going one or two, back and forth. It's more about staying in the moment and going with one camera shot,
And they were able to utilize space very well, with only mostly a 4:3 aspect ratio. Which is very weird. Is you got some cinematographers that one cinematographer in particular, Raoul Coulthard, who shot a lot of these French New Wave films. One thing that I found very interesting about Jean-Luc Godard films, if you watch his movies that were shot in black and white were shot in 4:3 full frame 1:3:1 Academy ratio, but his films that were shot in color, I believe, were shot in widescreen. Mm-hmm. It was very, very interesting to me that was something that showed that was something he wanted to do. And Raoul Coulthard, I believe, just passed away. He passed away in 2016. So yeah, he just passed away. And he was, an influence aesthetically on the French New Wave and people afterward, because his career went all the way up into the 80s. The cinematography is another interesting episode we could do, the history of cinematography. We've touched on it so much, though. It's almost every time we talk about
it's inherent in almost everything you talk about.
Really, it is, because it changes and evolves over time, whether it be aspect ratios or
you take
camera
it for granted.
work and
you take it for granted, really.
Editing is something that I think is very interesting. The evolution of editing, specifically when it comes to these movements. These movements always they utilize editing in order to craft a new look or a new feel or something like that.
Yeah, and that's kind of that was the main idea of the French New Wave, was to break ground in all ways, to change the game in all ways that they could, for the future of cinema. And I think that's something that should be a lesson to future generations. Always be trying to push the boundaries, try to do something different. One thing I
do want to mention before we officially wrap this up soon is that there was a bit of a rivalry between Francois Truffaut and Jean-Luc Godard, where they originally started out as friends and then became kind of competitors or rivals. I think that famously they would write letters to each other back and forth, criticizing each other's work and all kind of stuff like that. And it's very, very interesting just to see how different their styles are.
Yeah.
I've always kind of ingratiated myself more towards Francois Truffaut. I think I've seen more of his work because I think there was a lot more heart and a lot more meaning in Truffaut's work that was kind of laid out easier for us. Whereas I felt that Godard was kind of just, messing with us the whole time. Like, he was like,
I would say,
he was doing stuff just to make us, attack us as an audience. You know what I mean?
He was definitely the more experimental filmmaker.
Yeah, and he would, sometimes some of his work, he would do it just to do it. There is a absurdly long tracking shot in his movie Weekend, I think from 64 or something like that, and you think it's going to lead up to something, and it doesn't lead up to anything. And I felt like he's just doing that just to mess with us.
He's doing it to show you all the different people, what they, it shows all these different people in different cars, and showing what they're up to.
Usually, that's a long setup.
There's a payoff
and then
to
payoff,
it.
And then there's no payoff to it. And it shows how there are other directors who did that later on.
Oh, yeah. Well,
Stanley Kubrick.
I was going to say Emmanuel Lubezki does that with his filmmakers a lot, where they use a lot of long takes. And
well, I was even thinking more of, just messing with the audience, manipulating the audience, I think is something that a lot of filmmakers do. More provocateurs, you know what I mean?
Sure.
Someone
Lars von Trier.
Lars von Trier. I'm trying to think of the guy who directed Irreversible, Gaspar Noé. He's provocateur. Even someone like David Lynch, who he's doing it, but he's doing it more of in an artistic, surreal way to get inside your mind.
Because he knows
to make it feel uneasy.
He knows that if he does certain things, the audience expects one thing, but he's going to do it the other way just to fuck with you.
It's just unpredictable. You know what I mean? Jean-Luc Godard was more unpredictable. Truffaut was
like we said, it was more about being sincere and being real, and not necessarily.
400 Blows is, I think, a film that is an all-time film in the sense that there's universal stuff in there.
Yeah.
The character, I think, comes from a troubled home, and he's trying to find where he fits in the world, and he just can't quite, figure out. He's going through those teenage angsty years, which is something that happens in every generation. Breathless is, it's about a guy who's running away from a crime. Like, it's more like it doesn't have quite the meaning or something like that. I think if you watch Jean-Luc Godard's follow-up film, Vive sa vie, I think has more meaning in it.
Yeah.
That's a movie a lot of people talk about. He also did like a masculine, feminine, just a bunch of movies. Contempt is another one with Brigitte Bardot. That's a great movie.
Did he do A Woman is a Woman?
A Woman is a Woman, yeah. He did that. Truffaut did the movie called Shoot the Piano Player, which I watched years ago.
Yeah.
And that's a really good movie. Agnes Varda is an amazing, unappreciated filmmaker, and I think her early work was specifically a film called La Pointe Courte, which came out in '54, is very much a precursor to the French New Wave.
Yeah.
It's a fantastic, fantastic film. And I think a lot of people just need to check out a lot more of her work. Her work is actually tougher to find than most of these guys.
I think there is a box set from Studio Canal, maybe might have something out there. But and there were some things that came out through the Criterion Collection that hopefully will make their way back in.
Right. A lot of her stuff's available on DVD through them. They do have an Eclipse set that has like a bunch of her work in it as well. But that's mostly like her documentary stuff. But we've given you
a lot. Yeah, we covered a lot of filmmakers, a lot of different movies you can check out, a lot of recommendations. But there's so many layers to this movement that that could be left for other episodes. But I think we'll leave you off there, and if you guys have any favorite French New Wave films that you want to talk about, just send us a comment. We'll comment with you, talk about them. And maybe we'll probably definitely do some of these movies in a spotlight one day. Of course,
that's why I didn't want to get we don't want to get into too many of them.
Yeah,
and we don't want to get into each of them in depthly because we're probably going to look at some of them in depth later on.
Oh, definitely.
Some point, we'll probably pick out one that just a lot of people don't.
Yeah, we'll go for a lesser, probably a lesser obscure, but an important one that left a mark.
It probably won't be Breathless or 400 Blows, or
it'll maybe Jules and Jim. Maybe,
because Steven hasn't seen Jules.
I haven't seen it yet. I'd like to talk about it, but I think we'll leave it off there. And so with that said, even though we didn't say our names at the beginning, hopefully you're still with us. Andrew Cabral, where can you be found?
You can find me on Twitter at Capzilla06, as well as my YouTube channel, Capzilla Productions.
And you can find me, Stephen Billings, on Facebook. You can also find this podcast on Instagram, YouTube. You can find the audio also on Apple Podcast, iTunes. And coming up this next week, we are going to be doing our top 10 of the year for 2018. We're going to do our favorites. We're also going to have a guest on for the first time, a friend of ours, Mr. Dan Skep Allen's going to come on and discuss our favorite films from last year. And we're going to have a certain format. I haven't figured it out yet, but we're going to probably do our 10 favorites from each of us. And then we're going to probably talk about honorable mentions also at the end. But it'll be an interesting show. It'll be our first guest. So it'll be interesting to have a third person to talk to on here. That, and then I think we'll be close to talking about Oscar stuff. So
yes.
With that said, hey, keep on watching them movies.
I know I will.